Hello everybody, and thanks for a truly inspiring day. I'm really excited to be here because I get to share the stage with some extraordinary people. And if leadership, if one of the clues to leadership is to surround yourself with great people, then I think I've managed to pull off spectacular leadership today. Cecilia, Clare Reddington, Jabad Alipoor, and hello Viktoria. Can you see us?
Hi,
Victoria,
I can see
Modesta.
you guys, yeah?
You can see us
Great.
and we can hear you. Fantastic.
Perfect, fantastic, we're in good shape.
So we're going to be doing a couple of things today. We're going to be hearing from each of our panelists about their ideas in relation to leadership and innovation. We've asked them to be a little bit provocative if they'd like to be, so hopefully a few sparks may fly. And then we're going to ask some questions. We might ask some questions of each other. You'll get to ask some questions, and we have technology with us. So we have a screen here. You've got it up there. It's using Slido, and you're able to program your questions into the Slido mechanism. They'll come up. You can vote on them, and we'll see how that goes. I've got a bit of a reputation for being a great enthusiast for digital technology, but not knowing how any of it works. So I'll try and combine those two skills today. However, I do also have a sense that we are in the room with real people as well. Hello, people who are online, we love you too. But we are in the room with some real people, and if you do want to jump up and just wave and ask a question that hasn't gone through Slido, that is okay too. All right, so we're going to start off, we're going to go this way. Victoria, do you mind if we come to you fourth and we'll sort of slide along the panel here and take it one at a time? Is that all right?
Sure, no, that's absolutely fine. Thanks for having me here. Hello from Los Angeles. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the general topic of the event and stuff. I mean, for me, there are many ways to approach the creation of like a new cultural representation. And one of the things that I really like to focus is really sort of conceptually demonstrating the vision so that it's very spelled out. 6 years ago, while the world was just starting to think about the subject of disability within society, I saw an opportunity on a sort of larger scale. You know, what does the post-disability space look like when everybody already got over comparing how fast they could run and questioning sort of the more primitive aspects of humanity, so to speak. And at the time, as someone who didn't identify with an image of disability and all the things that it came with, you know, I wanted to get an opportunity to rebrand that and show how approaching it with a futuristic attitude can really be something completely different to what we saw. And another thing is, you know, solving physical problems has really kind of advanced the progress of technology. So to me, it seemed like a parallel that it was very possible to sort of have that leadership happen, you know, in a cultural sense as well. So having that kind of alternative vision as an artist is really, really important. And, you know, for me, it's worked the best when it kind of comes from a genuine place where you're really sort of trying to do something that really kind of means to you. So it's kind of like, you know, art and sophisticated activism. That's why they sort of end up kind of being a really good pairing. But at the end of the day, everything sort of rests on having the persistence and the right supporters and the patience, so that, you know, the vision that you have and the things that you do really can't be erased from the cultural landscape, and you have to just keep going. You know, ironically, after like maybe 6 years of working on the same sort of ideas, it was a group of mentors in a TV network that really sort of took their leap in believing in me and helping me progress. And, you know, and I think that the arts institutions and you know, and that whole supporting network sort of, it's changing slowly, but there is this sort of entrepreneurial, multidisciplinary artist that is really kind of starting to dominate the space. And I think that you know, there is still gaps within the supportive network that I personally find I sit very much between sort of more academic stuff and pop culture, and there are many times where I just think, well, where do you go to support your projects? Because it seems to be, that support network seems to be still pretty set in its place. So yeah, that's been sort of my experience and expertise in this so far.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Viktoria. That's a great start. And you asked a question there, which is if you were looking for a place to support your projects, where would you go? And the next person who's going to speak to us, Cecilia, absolutely works for one of the first places I would go if I wanted support for a project. So, Cecilia.
Great. So hopefully, hi everyone, and thank you to John for coming and chairing us, and thanks also to Diane for inviting us all. I'm going to talk actually about radicalising innovation at in arts organising, aka staying alive and staying relevant. Okay, so I've got quite a lot of questions, more than answers, and I'd like to start by marking a date. So tomorrow is the 10th anniversary of the collapse of the Lehman Brothers investment bank, an event that precipitated the global financial crisis. As a central principle upon which contemporary society is organised, I think it's necessary to acknowledge how the financial crisis has affected every aspect of our lives, indeed, according to world ecologist Jason W. Moore, the current environmental and economic crises are a result of what he calls capital in the web of life. So this generation-defining event has changed the entire landscape, vocabulary and imagining of our identities and lifestyles, leading us to where we are now, a place where the idea of innovation is absolutely necessary because so much is breaking down. Innovation is an emancipatory call to play and to create, coming from the Latin to make new. Last week, I had the pleasure of experiencing We Know Not What We May Be, which is a new production by Metis Theatre and an ArtsAdmin commission, which is all about how we, the audience members, can collectively produce and transform society. It's an instance of how, at this time of outrageous inequality and socio-political instability, culture and creativity are fundamental not only in changing and shifting mindsets, but also through the very act of creating new and alternative visions of the future. Through their very existence, we know not what we may be is changing our present and also our reality. So, at the same time, innovation is also practiced as a consultancy service to improve efficiency, performance, and profit maximization. So how do we, working within culture and the arts, decouple this idea of innovation from these formulaic solutions that only let us participate in ways that are defined by capital, ways that are safe, without space to take any risk? So we desperately need innovation in our modes of cultural production and organising. Banking, healthcare, transport, and even the music industry have undergone total transformation since the financial crisis. And in many ways, arts and culture have maintained their funding structures and their power structures. So, okay, if we're thinking and playing a thought experiment, where tomorrow the power structures of arts organisations are overturned, then what might we create to support radically inclusive arts and culture instead? What new business models and types of arts organising are needed to truly innovate? Could audiences, artists and organisers support and co-own arts infrastructures? Could we build new and different value propositions based on values such as curiosity, care, cooperation, being and living together? What can we do to allow arts organising to also be a creative practice and enable different modes of arts organising to reflect the diversity of artistic practices? How would cultural activities be organised with and in communities without vampirism? In other words, without levering participation as social and cultural capital? How are those who have previously been ignored, neglected, marginalised, be given space and agency to create culture not as exceptional as I think that Nikesh was kind of referring to this morning, or as special people, but just as who they are in these new arts support structures? So in other words, how can we make innovation about a lifelong approach of curiosity and desire to learn in the world? Tom Wilcox talked about continual improvement this morning. How can we think about bravery to change and generosity to enable agency? Our cultural organisations are becoming irrelevant, out of touch, and maybe even defunded unless we, A, envisage and start living in an inclusive culture, B, be honest about the barriers to equality, and C, address those barriers by enabling a more equitable allocation of resources. How do we use creative space to change society? There's a lot in there. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cecilia. Brilliant. So I think Cecilia's given us a bunch of fantastic provocations, and I mean, a number of them that stood out, but the one that jumped up at me was the idea that everybody else has changed their structures since the financial crisis, and the arts hasn't, and is a new generation of leaders, not about taking power within the structures that we have, but completely overturning those structures and reinventing them. I mentioned that Cecilia, who works for ArtsAdmin, of course, amongst many other achievements, is one of the people and works for one of the places that I would go to if I was wanting work supported. And one of the other great places of support, particularly for artists and creatives who want to work in spaces surrounding technology, over the last decade has been Watershed, Pervasive Media Studio, and iShed. So, Chief Executive Clare Reddington.
I'm going to stand up too because I can't see your faces because the projector's in the way. And that's kind of weird. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It won't come as any great surprise, but I'm just going to say the same as her, but she said it cleverer. So here we go. And actually, there's a question here that's like, what is the biggest blocker of innovation? And I think that's what I'm going to talk about. I get asked to talk about innovation at tech conferences and academic conferences all of the time, and it makes me very tired to be the kind of controversial woman with opinions in these spaces. So it makes me very happy to be here, because that doesn't seem like a relevant question today. But when we're talking about technology futures and innovation, actually the bread and butter of our work isn't innovation, it's invention. It's the kind of messy, emergent, brilliant space where new ideas are made and where new kinds of stories are told. And I think the conditions for invention in the kind of world that Cecilia just described to us are about working with people who are not like you. Invention doesn't happen in silos. It isn't about respecting what's been done before, and it definitely isn't about acting within a canon. Doing new stuff is hard, and inventive leaders and people who lead invention, maybe the same thing, maybe not, they're not lonesome heroes in ivory towers. They're people whose energy is piqued by openness and by collaboration. They're people who think inclusively and not hierarchically. So given that, I find it too really strange that the mechanisms and models for supporting invention in the cultural sector have largely not reinvented themselves. It feels like a category error question in a space that needs multiple answers. Invention is not a place for key performance indicators, match funding requirements, or a slavish pursuit of jobs created. Yet, that is how we are funded, and for some of us, that's how we're still funding others. KPIs are the death of openness and collaboration. They feel like a product of an old-fashioned notion of leadership and accountability. In my view, the patriarchy does counting. So, how do we enable innovation in different ways? Support ecologies and slates of work rather than single projects. Find different things to value and to report on. Can we measure responsibility? Watershed makes a commitment to artists to work with them over long periods of time, supporting them to develop their practice in a way most suited to their needs. We consider and we reconsider how we can best support them, how we can use our institutional privilege for their needs. Can we score collaboration? We're committed to cross-sector, cross-community collaboration as the best way to nurture a creative ecosystem. We seek out opportunities to work with partners in new areas, both geographic and thematic. And most importantly, we try to replicate doing stuff that other people are already doing, or stuff that someone else has started to do. Maybe our main responsibility is to get out of the way. Can we measure and reward passion? We throw ourselves wholeheartedly into everything we do. We're passionate about the potential of new technologies to facilitate citizen engagement, to distribute knowledge, and to support creativity. We believe in artists as inventors and innovators. We champion the power of art to lead corporates and technology companies rather than settling for the platforms and the tools that they'll give us. So my provocation, if I have one, and maybe even that's a kind of patriarchal notion, but anyway, my provocation, if I have one, is that leadership and power structures need to be questioned. We need to find new ways to support and value invention. And then we need to find ways to scale and share it, which is what we think of as innovation. As leaders, we need to interrogate what we're asking people, agreeing and trying to measure. And by all of that, I think I mean fuck KPIs, because they just keep things in place. Thanks.
Brilliant. Fuck KPIs and, oh, you get one of these as well, wow. Fuck KPIs and the patriarchy does counting. Thank you very much, Claire. And also another thing that was really resonant for me in that was invention comes from working with people who are not like you. And if there's a theme coming through the day, it's that sense of embracing working with people who are not the same is where innovation and excitement's going to lie. Javad Alipoor is an extraordinary artist in his own right, as well as one of the really exciting emerging leaders. And I can't wait to hear what you've got to say, Javad. Are you going to work from your seat, or are you going to come
I can
up
do
onto
if that's all right. Or,
yeah? Great.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thanks for asking me to be here. I always feel with sort of situations like this, when there's a real mix of people in the room, there's often a basic sort of divide, if you like, between people who are here for one of two reasons. So there are either people here who are more established and are coming from more established organisations, or there are people who are wanting to get into that position and perhaps like that, you know, that much kind of cursed word, emerging, or kind of they run a small company or something like that. I feel like I have one provocation, which is more for the people who have accrued some power, and one provocation for those who are busy accruing that whenever they can. I'm often invited to these kinds of things to talk about diversity because I'm mixed race and I have a regional accent or whatever. And I'm not really going to go into that too much today, apart from to say that a lot of the problems that I identify for people who are, you know, in that sort of on their way up position or working at setting up their own small organisations, basically, if you've got a regional accent, are a woman, disabled, of colour, or may the Lord preserve you, any combination of those things, then all these things apply, but with some extra chutney as well. So yeah, the basic, for me, I think for people who are running their own organisations and stuff, my basic provocation is this: do not think of yourself as having a deficit. Move beyond that. My provocation to you is, what do you have that other people need? And I think that's related to the notion of innovation. My provocation to those bigger organisations goes, you need to be more honest with people about what you've got that's worth something that they might want to share with you, and also what you need from them. And I think this gets to the root of the contradiction of how we fund art in this country. So whether funding comes through earned income, whether it comes through government subsidy, whether it comes through philanthropy, for all kinds of reasons that we sort of can go into, that funding tends to stick to bigger institutions. It tends to stick to buildings, to kind of things that have a heritage of attracting money in the first place. What those organisations are less good at doing, for all kinds of reasons, is innovating. I think this is often because if you have an organisation that has a culture and a tradition of having to do the same thing and deliver the same outcomes, not KPIs, that they've been doing for a number of decades, that means that often when there's the beginnings of a secular decline or a pattern of decline, so we can, in theatre, for instance, we can think about how slowly but surely in regional theatre, our audiences are getting older and less diverse. Because there's a line of march and there's a way that kind of traditions have been accrued, it's very difficult for people to innovatively respond to that situation. And I think right now, when we see the political challenges we do internationally, there's a specific sharpness and a reason for us to want to be challenging that. It strikes me that there's been a couple of big kind of historical anniversaries recently, one of which has been around the miners' strike, obviously the Lehman Brothers stuff. There was a whole bunch of stuff about Section 28 over the past couple of years being repealed and stuff. And I think it's interesting for me that, like, at the same time, we're seeing innovation coming from artists and bit of the sector that you don't usually expect. So one of the biggest, obvious thing to say, one of the biggest cultural explosions of this country in the past 30 years has been grime music. Now, that scene got almost not one penny of support from public subsidy, almost not one penny of support from our big institutions. And in fact, the liberal kind of people who are in those positions of influence, when the Metropolitan Police were trying to smash that scene off the streets through racist policing strategies, there wasn't anyone who even opened the door and went, well, hang on, we've got a board and a lawyer on the board, and you can come do your party here. And so, for me, when that innovation works correctly together as a scene, as an industry in the future, we won't have to be making work that kind of is about celebrating the fact that stuff like the criminalization of homosexuality is gone, or commiserating the fact that the miners got fucked over. It'll be about being able to tell stories about how we came together and actually supported political resistance, which I think we need to do more than ever right now. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that advice about never seeing a deficit is so important for everybody, and is, I think, runs again to the heart of a lot of what a number of students have been talking about, in seeing always the strengths that we bring to any situation. Viktoria, you started so beautifully and enthusiastically that I didn't get a chance to introduce you properly. But we saw a little bit of your film earlier on, and you're
wonderful.
An artist who has made some amazing life choices and really inserted yourself into debate around physicality, around disability, around culture and creativity in really exceptional ways. And I wondered whether you had any questions that you'd like to bounce back to the rest of the panel here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things said. It's funny how the biggest thing that I'm sensing sort of from this panel is that I sort of feel like I'm kind of on the other side. I'm kind of the artist that is, sort of trying to soup through all the stuff that's happening. But what I really liked from the last comments actually just now is that, we kind of expect artists to be innovative and to be doing all these things. And it's the institutions that is so much harder to even imagine how they can be innovative. I mean, I've been very lucky to be a fellow at MIT Media Lab in America, and that for me has sort of transformed the idea of how something like that can function, how, you can sort of just follow your gut into supporting projects and people where it isn't necessarily about, their background and education and where they come from. It's about the idea, it's about what they represent. And, it's, I feel like that's that's really sort of the provocation here is, what is actually happening within the space to change this platform that doesn't seem to be changing very much. I mean, even the music industry, for all of its terrible things, is slowly moving into some sort of progressive direction. So I mean, it's super interesting to hear what everybody's talking about.
So what would a reinvented and innovative art structure, arts organisation, art support mechanism look like? Claire, you run one in many ways. Do you feel that you've managed to make that change, or do you feel as though it's still very difficult to escape those KPIs and create a different kind of structure? And Javad and Cecilia, maybe if you could talk about what your beautiful imaginary arts organisations of the future might look like.
So yes, of course it's hard, and of course Watershed still takes on, I guess, the emotional labour of KPIs, which are key performance indicators for anyone. So it's a way of measuring cultural output of counting things. It's a public sector kind of space. And I guess our job is to take some of the stress out of that for lots of the artists we fund. I guess the thing that I was trying to point to is that we think of ourselves as an ecology of artists and companies and institutions working together, all bringing our own specialisms, our own ideas. But the Pervasive Media Studio requires people to be open and generous with their thinking in return for gifted desk space and producer support. So there is no money transaction between us. And that allows everybody's ideas to get better. It allows people to share very freely. And it allows us to understand how different forms of value play out within a community. And I think that is the thing that I'm really excited about. When we think about how we fund things, can we fund things in groups? Can we think about funding ecologies or slates of work? And then can we think about how responsibility and trust and care and kindness and curiosity are rewarded within that? And I think some of those things are very difficult to also maintain openness and permeability and proper inclusive invitations to people while still working with people over really long periods of time and being careful with them. That's a kind of real competing tension in this space. But I do think it's possible if you sort of de-talk the linearity of how we're funding things.
Great. Cecilia.
Gosh, well, I think
Is
that working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I can't see you anymore, but yeah.
It's all behind the projector.
Exactly. Anyway, so I just joined ArtsAdmin about 6 months ago, and before that, I was working as an independent, as a curator, as well as.
I can't really hear you, by the way.
Oh, okay. You can see my hand, I think. I can see you, but I can't really hear you. Oh, okay. Right, I'll speak up. Is that better, Viktoria? Yeah? Okay, cool. And I was teaching at the Royal College of Art, so I think a lot of where I'm coming from is really about, trying to fit myself into or try and find my own space within an organisation. And that's to be really honest about, my experience at the moment and trying to figure out how we can make organisations more equitable and involve artists more in our processes and things like that. So, yeah, that's all I will say for the time being.
Yeah, I think that there's a bunch of, I think along with a bunch of people, I've become quite interested in the idea of cultural democracy and what that might look like. It's a phrase that if you're that way inclined, you can find a collection of essays online written by Raymond Williams, the cultural critic, when he was a member of Arts Council's National Council in the 60s. And he talks about this notion as being one in which people's access to culture would become a lot more democratized, within which artists and people who produce stuff would have a much greater say and so on. And I think if I was to straight up me, an individual, not a person who works in the sector, I think my absolute, the thing that I think would really sort of shift all that stuff is thinking more radically about politics. I think that it's really interesting that universal basic income is being talked about by not just the Green Party anymore, but the Labour Party as well, and that's not quite as mad a thing as it's perhaps been in the past. And that idea of it's interesting that we see that flowering of working class culture and arts and a society that takes it seriously in the early 20th century, just when we get things like the 8-hour day and those reforms that mean people have enough head space and enough heart space to be able to do all the things they want to do. And I sometimes wonder whether that's our 21st century labour reform.
Which relates directly to what Ibrahim was saying before, of course, around, the culture is always there. It hasn't been allowed the space to be seen.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Viktoria, yeah.
No, this just kind of made me think about something. One of the sort of observations and experiences that I've sort of seen is it's there are several different steps that are kind of in place that can be more dismantled when you're looking at entering into arts through very proper channels. You finish your different degrees, you kind of process progress in that space in that way. What I find really sort of more challenging, and when you're talking about access to minorities and etc., is that you get into a space where it's very difficult to plug into the sort of British art kind of sort of ladder, as so to speak, when you come into it from a different place where you're not sort of you didn't finish your different sort of education, and you arrive at a point where you're like, okay, now I'd like to do this. So I think that and some of the things that I've seen kind of just traveling around the world that seem very innovative to me is actually being able to pick up different ideas and different artists and different innovators within their field, from different points in their life, and when they sit on a different table to the kind of this measuring table of this sort of art institution, which is kind of the thing that I always have a love and hate relationship. I've seen many artists come out from that it all makes sense, but at the same time, this rigidness isn't always the way forward. So I just wonder what you all guys think about, how that is being tackled, because I haven't really seen anything that is very effective for that.
So I'm going to join that question up with one of the ones that we've got coming up on the Slido. So I think, Viktoria, you're asking a question about how, when you haven't gone through the normative channels to get from A to B to C to a career in the arts, how you get in, what are the other ways, and are those structures breaking down a little bit? But there's a really provocative question that's come up here that I think is really interesting, which talks about when you, in a way, have made a step inside the institutions. Have we just lost Viktoria? And that is, how does someone from a background that has been marginalized by society protect themselves when attempting to challenge authority and institutions? So it's one thing to be in there in a way, but how are you looked after once you're in there, particularly if you don't want to see business as usual? So maybe either of those questions anyone would like to respond to.
I mean, anyone trying to make change has a really tough time, like Maria said. And if you're not from like a privileged background, or you haven't come through those societies, it's really fucking difficult. And so for those of us who do have power, who do sit at those things, it's our job to protect those people, not their jobs to like put their fists up and protect themselves. Because quite often people from excluded backgrounds or marginalized backgrounds are doing the emotional labor of the cultural sector for us, and that's not okay. So actually our job is, Nikesh said it really nicely, like open the door, get a megaphone and ask people to come the fuck in, but then make sure you protect them, and that you witness them and you hear the difficulty of that space.
Well, because ultimately I think people just end up sort of leaving, really. It's been interesting just sort of meeting a lot of people that have left sort of UK, and you sort of go, what's your story, and they're like, well, yeah, I started doing these things and things were going really great, but then you just can't really tap into this thing, so you just go elsewhere, and several years later, the sort of you get a phone call and you're like, we want you back, we want you to do this thing, and it's I think there's definitely like a little bit of a broken system happening there that kind of it just doesn't utilize the talent that you actually have in UK properly, so that it doesn't make it flourish, basically.
Cecilia?
Yeah, I was just going to say, going back to this question of protecting yourself, I think it's really about making sure that you have some people to talk to about that, and grow that kind of support network, and also to really, going back to one of the things that Sarah was talking about this morning in terms of just calling out the facts and the truth. If you experience these things, then be brave and call those out, and that can be really, really difficult, because when you're talking to people who are in a position of power, then you don't always feel that that's something that you can do and that you're allowed to do. And, within the cultural sector in the UK, I think that lots of people who don't look in a certain way, who are not white and who are not middle class and all of those sorts of things, are not necessarily seen as validated. And there's been a sort of culture of exceptionalism, as in I feel that I exceptionalized myself when I was growing up, and I was like, oh, I'm so great, I can be the only like ethnic person who's here. And that was and it also made me feel completely isolated. So I'm still trying to deal with all of those sorts of things as I kind of progress through organizations and things.
Just before we came on stage, we were talking about being the kind of leader who shows when their feelings are hurt, and about how like people don't really like that. Like you're supposed to become like CEO and then not have feelings anymore. And I was like, oh God, I'm really rubbish at that. I cry all the time, really openly. But actually modeling that as a different way of being, of looking after an organization also feels really important.
Yeah, just throwing that, in terms of that not coming up through the traditional way. Like I was a youth and community worker before I worked in theatre, did an Arts Council funded project, Asian Theatre School, for like people of Asian extraction, surprisingly, who were interested in theatre, and got made redundant as a youth worker and slightly naively went, let's give this theatre thing a go, and actually that's like, it's a non-deficit thing. Like, do you know what I mean? That meant that I was able to make my first steps in like community arts and be quite confident in the quality of the work I was doing in a way that actually a lot of people who came up through community arts weren't necessarily able to do. And I think that in terms of how people protect themselves, I would just offer that, I'd offer two thoughts. One is that, to reiterate that point about networks of support, my experience is, as my personal experience, I can't speak for gender and stuff like that, but my personal experience is basically a lot of people who are either a slightly more working class background or people of colour who have got into positions of influence in my bit of the arts are actually like broadly all right with me dropping them an email or reaching out to them. And like that, in that little section, there's like, it's more surprising to be told, oh, don't, this person won't help you out, than, so like just have a go, reach out to people and see who'll chat to you. People will do more than not. And the other one would be, I think, choose at least once a year, but depending on how much like kind of mental resilience you've got, maybe not that much more than that, choose one big kick-off a year, do you know what I mean? And then go hard, Like, find one thing where you are absolutely sure you're in the right. I always say with people, like, to give a really obvious example, if I'm talking about my work with a programmer and they don't like my work, that's my problem. If I go, which person of colour's work do you like? And they go, that's their problem. Do you know what I mean? If that's not in their programme. And like moments like that where you choose something where you know you've got them, do you know what I mean? And you know that they're in the wrong. I have only ever regretted not kicking off about stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Like you look like a heavyweight, you look like you know what you're talking about, do it. Do you know what I mean? When you've got them, go for them.
Just a quick question for you in the audience, and you can say yes to both of these, but who in the audience would identify as an independent artist or running that independent own arts organization or activity, yeah? Round about half. And how many people would identify as being part of a larger institution? Around about 2/3. So that's an interesting number of people who fit in both, which I actually think is really healthy. But there was one question, actually, that kept floating to the top of the screen and has suddenly disappeared now that I want to ask it, which was, what do you do when you're trying to institute change? And the exec team, it said, but I guess the leadership is resistant. So you're an emerging leader, you're trying to make change happen, but there's a resistance to that at the top. What advice do people on the panel have around that? And maybe this time we'll start with Cecilia, go through Clare and Javad, and end with Viktoria.
I think, again, it's about maybe gather support. So who around you who around you can you convince at the first off, and talk to them about this idea? And then, is there some way of somehow making it happen on a small scale? Like, as in, have you got some resources in the back of your pocket, or can you share those with other people? Can you find that way of doing that so that you can prove that it's a brilliant idea and actually the exec team just need to get on board?
If you are of the position that when you can, leave. Because I don't believe that I believe that not every organisation will change, and
But
some
what if you
should
really
die.
care about the thing that this organisation is for, and you...
But then, are you for the organisation or for the meaning and the impact that you want to create? And I guess thinking about what it is you want to do in the world, that vessel may not be the place for you to do that. And that vessel possibly won't even survive if it doesn't understand in leadership terms how to change and how to engage. Not everybody can leave. That's a privileged position in and of itself. And then I guess it's trying to think about what can you influence, what is in your sphere, and can you model the change that you want to make in smaller ways?
It's interesting. I mean, I get with this kind of question, I always, and someone could have asked it in any context, but it does make me think about it in like a diversity context and stuff. And I think there's just, I think the flip of that question is like, what do you do if people won't take that? It's like the colleague spoke, was it Thomas who was speaking earlier very eruditely about how the personal vision and personality of especially artistic leadership is so important to keep mission and brand on point and stuff. I think the flip side of that is how do you learn to not sweat stuff if people aren't even giving you the freedom to sort of do what you want? Do you know what I mean? I think in a way that's just probably developing on what you were saying, that like it's not, you can't, for me I think there's a really important thing about going, what does victory and what does success look like in this bit of autonomy I've been given? Do you know what I mean? Without sort of doing that emotional labour of dealing with a load of stuff that, to be honest, people paid a lot more aren't dealing with.
Yeah,
Viktoria.
I mean, leaders are definitely not just made by themselves. You've got to really work hard at just finding the people to support you. But I mean, something that I've learned from my experience, like 3 years ago, I had a video that went viral, and all of a sudden, the more sort of pop culture people were like, "Oh my God, we need to do this, and then I didn't really see how any of that was sort of what I was doing was ready for culture to be sort of expanded properly. And then I was like, actually, wait a minute. There is literally a whole other world of different industries that can work with you, that can look at the things that you're doing. So the thing is that there isn't always, if the traditional sector isn't going to innovate and it's structured the way it needs to, there is always, the entire field of digitally advanced, different kind of integrated cultures that are ready to take on that change. It's like why the Ubers and Airbnbs come up. It's like everybody's always looking for the new way to represent art, and I think that it's one of those things, people either have to sort of step up and start sort of looking for to support people that they wouldn't normally, or it's they're going to go elsewhere because I think when you're persistent, you're going to make it work.
Do you think, Viktoria and the panel, I think it's implicit in a couple of the comments that you've made now, though, that the danger is that the innovation in the arts goes into the art. Wow, what a danger. But because so much innovation effort goes into the art, that the platforms, the structures don't get innovated. Is that a danger for us? And if so, what do we do about it?
It's absolutely a danger, because the thing is that, it's like culture has been flipped open to the worldwide view of, of the internet, of, everything is out there. It's like, I read this awesome article recently called Big Flat Now, where it really sort of talks about this new staging culture where, you can have institutions try to monopolize and sort of see, push the way for things to go in a certain way, but ultimately, you know, it's a different space. And I do think that our whole structure is in danger because, you know, this democratization of culture is happening kind of whether you want it or not. It's happening in a different space. And if the organizations that are more traditional aren't sort of adapting to that, there is literally, it's happening. Like this evolution is already happening. You know, you can have, there is multiple ways of getting your work out there. There's multiple ways of reaching out to a lot of different people and just finding supporters. You know, everyone's voice can be heard. So I think it's a very tricky point, you know, because I do believe that there's a lot of really wonderful people and mentors and supporters that work within the traditional field, but this thing is kind of running away real fast.
Cecilia.
I think.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about arts organising rather than arts organisations in a way, because I think that, you know, I know that I am head of artist development at ArtsAdmin, which is an organisation that's been going for 40 years. And it's an amazing organisation. But then again, you know, who knows? Are we going to go for another 40 years? Should we be going for another 40 years? It's a massive question. And I think the reason why I started my sort of provocation with a reference to the global financial crisis is because at that time, then we really saw that there was an opportunity to kind of change things and to ask big questions. And I think that on the one hand, you know, we are doing that, and maybe it's not always the people that we see in positions in large institutions who are doing those sorts of things, but there are other parts of cultural activity where that's happening. And to some extent, a lot of the cultural policy and a lot of the cultural discussion has been about austerity and protectionism without thinking about the opportunity. And I think, you know, 10 years on after the global financial crisis, we need to make sure that that opportunity is taken up, as well as thinking about, you know, how can subsidy be carried on.
So we've got a couple of questions that have been at the top of the list of questions for a while now that are other external factors, are about other impacts in a way on what we do and things on which what we do might impact. So just to read out both questions, would you say Brexit is as generation defining as the financial crash? And where does climate change and environmental sustainability sit in relation to leadership and innovation for the panel? So those are about these wider contexts in which we make the work. So open it up to the panel to answer either or both of those. Javad, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Brexit question is a really interesting one. I think that I think our sector, the leadership of our sector has got itself in the same mess that the leadership of this country has got itself in over Brexit. I think that there was an immediate, there was such a sense of surprise and shock at the result and stuff that people felt immediately a sense of mea culpa and self-torture and effectively, you know, that kind of liberal intelligentsia leadership of our sector, I just felt it started to collapse in front of this challenge. So we got the notion of balance and stuff. So in America at the minute, there's an amazing article on CNN, the front page of CNN, that was about why aren't the British talking about Russian interference in Brexit in the same way that we're talking about Russian interference in the presidential election. And their point that they were making was because the entirety of our kind of elite just went, okay, oh God, we're going to have to make a deal with this thing. And we're so far down that process now that people sort of start to look daft. And I think the way in which it's very definitely generation defining is a lot of rubbish is talked about the different, the reasons people voted this way or that and the other. The initial Ashcroft data after the referendum showed that there were the two biggest indicators of whether or not you voted Brexit. The first one was attitudinal. So if you agreed with the question, that if you agreed with the idea that capital punishment, that is to say hanging, should be brought back, you were 95% likely to have voted for Brexit or something. The second one, as we know, the second point, as we know, is the generational difference. That obviously we're speaking to a group of young and emerging leaders, and Brexit is something that's being done by a different generation to this generation. We just like all the evidence shows that. And I think for me, I suppose it feeds into that question about like, what is it that as, in terms of like innovation as artists or whatever, what is it that we can do together? How is it that we can sort of speak as a voice together that means our innovation is, I don't want to say more important, because art is really important. It's why we do what we do. But how do we have that with something that has purchase, that has traction outside of just that world of the arts, really, that sort of perhaps, you know, if you go back to the 1700s and 1800s, people would look as artists as a model to live. You know, artists would be people kind of that felt like they were from the future. And I sort of wonder how that fits into those questions. I'm not really sure, but sorry.
It also, I think for me, the Brexit question also fits into something around how we care for our audiences and what we're here for. Because yes, it's generation defining, but the financial crash happened and then we lived with its consequences. Brexit has kind of thrown everyone into a state of emergency because we don't know what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty in the world, and therefore people need places to talk and to see other ideas and to engage with fellow humans and to just be. There's an artist that we work with called Hazel who once said, if there was ever an emergency, I would come to Watershed. And I feel like that's the point of a cultural organisation, is that we can come together and kind of share some of this stuff.
I think those are fantastic thoughts, that being an artist and being someone who works in the arts is also about creating a model for living and creating a place to be.
Yeah.
Cecilia. Oh, sorry, Victoria, you were about to say something.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying not to lose some thoughts. I really liked the first comments actually about sort of drawing a parallel between the state of the the art and the state of the political situation, because I feel like the thing that's really at the core of that goes to an equality of what is actually valued. How do you define when someone's opinion or someone's work or someone's intentions are actually valued, and I feel like that's the thing that really sort of divided the political sort of spectrum, where a lot of people just felt like their views were not valued and they were not actually considered, sort of, they weren't even considered in the conversation, and the thing that's happening with the art stuff is like, and what I would almost ask for as an artist myself to think about is to try to reinvent that measuring scale of, where do you have to come in for your work to be valued? If you, for example, an internet artist, can you go in with a serious institution and be like, talk about your career, because the thing is it's about kind of valuing old and new, and I think that there's a lot of new things that are happening that aren't even considered serious art, and it's like, well, actually it is, on this big platform, everything is valued, so it goes back to a very, very basic human sort of value system, I would say, that is still very unequal, and that's just causing this conflict.
Cecilia.
I would say, just going back to Victoria's points there, I would say that hopefully we can move to a place where all of those things are valued, and that we're already trying to do that. And when we're kind of, I want to be a person who does that, and I hope that, I'm sure that my panelists try to do that as well, in the sense of ensuring that all of those voices are heard, ensuring that different perspectives are heard and valued alongside each other, and it's that juxtaposition. That's what I think is about being together, as in like the fact that we can all exist in this space, and that actually we can learn from each other, and that's where cultural activity, the heart of cultural activity should be, I think.
Actually, just really quickly about the whole environment and all of that sort of stuff. One of probably the only positive things that's coming out of this chaos that is literally happening on our planet and our politics and everything else is that this environment is actually forcing people and artists to really start putting their human values at the forefront of their work. It's like you can no longer, put out stupid stuff like you did in the 90s in the pop culture, where it just meant absolutely nothing. You know, every single piece of thing that's starting to come out there, you know, artists are really engaging with their values, with the things that matter to them. And that is actually probably the only like really amazing thing that's happening out of that, is people are forced to care about stuff because they can't ignore it anymore. So hopefully it's going to be a very flourishing time for new ideas.
I think that's a brilliant thought. It's such a good thought that I almost want to end the session early to end on that thought, but I'm not going to. But the idea that the positive in living in such difficult and challenging times is that everything has to matter, and that for a generation of artists coming through and for a generation of arts and arts organisers already in place, that shift needs to be at the heart of everything that we do is incredibly powerful. There is a question about KPIs, key performance indicators, that keeps bubbling up to the head of the list, but I am not going to ask it. I refuse, because you told me, fuck the KPIs.
Fuck KPIs.
So I'm just going to fuck them.
Well, we could, but I think the
No,
answer is
you
it
can't
can't be
It's getting
answered because we
downvoted.
don't know.
But what I was going to say was, if you want the answer to that question, Clare Reddington actually does know the answer. So come and find her after the debate.
No, but I don't. But I'd really like to talk to people who care about the question.
Yeah. So find you after this debate. But there was a question that lurked around at the bottom of the list earlier on that I thought was really important. So I'm going to ask that one. And it was from somebody who asked, what if you're, they were basically saying, what if you're a quiet doer rather than a confident talker? If that's your way of functioning, you know, can you still emerge as a leader in all of this? And if so, how? So any thoughts on that?
I think absolutely yes. Like, this is a little bit of a point that I was trying to say at the very beginning. It's like, there are a lot of people who can actually do a lot of talking. You know, you have this kind of activist voices that are kind of really talking about change and stuff. And ultimately it is about, you know, the way of creating an example of your work, creating an example of your vision, however quiet, you know, however long it needs to take you to actually do that, and then show it, is just as valid as being loud and outspoken out there. There's, you know, it's really just about putting in the work and actually executing that idea, not being scared to like, oh, no one's going to like it. It isn't about anyone to like, really. It's about sort of making sure that, you know, you've at least given it a full go and you've executed something that you can present. You can always find an agent to talk loud on your behalf, or whoever, a mentor, a friend, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, actually. So two groups that I'd like to mention, one of which is Hamza Hassan's Shy Radicals, which is a brilliant book all about being shy and about actually making change and social activism. Hamza Hassan's Shy Radicals. And the other thing was the Shadow Sisters Fight Club, which is an amazing self-defense class that's been put together by, and is for women, non-binary people, and QT people of color, essentially. And they promote a kind of physical and metaphysical gathering, I guess, of interrogating how we can be together both as people who have power, but also people who really care about each other. And I think it's through those spaces that we can kind of gather more resilience, find ways to be physical as well as cerebral, and do things that are uplifting and enjoyable, and have those difficult conversations.
I was thinking about it in terms of like making friends and making fans. Matt Locke from Story Things talks really nicely about how meaning is circulated, not broadcast in the digital world, and that you find the people who are the fans, the small amount of people who are the fans of your work, and empower and equip them to help you, to work with you, to collaborate with you, and all being heard rather than that single person. So I think there is much more engaged, more democratic, more collaborative ways of being heard. And I guess for those of us who are loud, if you're going to take the mic and if you're going to like grab the limelight, make sure you know what you're pointing it at.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would agree with a lot of that, basically. I think I'm not someone who, anyone who knows me would describe as a quiet anything, I don't think. But like some of the most inspiring people who are doing absolutely amazing things, are in quite substantial, positions of influence, have been those kinds of like people, do you know what I mean, that you could describe in that way. And I think that like there's, like people have, there's a lot of stuff written and talked about in terms of leadership styles and how people show themselves and stuff. And I think basically like any way that you come off like that has it, this is a really boring way of putting it, but any way that you come off like that has its strengths and its weaknesses. It's just about knowing how to try and alleviate the stuff that you feel is maybe holding you back and being more confident in the stuff that I think you think you're better at, and working with the right people.
I really like that. Actually, everyone's point at the end of the day is you can have different leadership styles, but ultimately it's about actually being a really decent person and leaving a trail of caring about things, caring about people, caring about the things that you're doing, and putting like that sort of human spirit into it, which actually translates really amazingly because it's super powerful and yeah.
Viktoria, I think you've now managed to do it for us perfectly, which is to give us the thought on which we should end. So thank you so much, Viktoria, Javad, Clare, and Cecilia, for your beautiful thoughts and for all of the inspiration you provided. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And we wish you the very best for the networking part of the day.